had not, in all of these years of being a paranormal researcher, I had never heard of this case. And as someone who is, I mean, I've spent, I have like a master's degree in, supernatural American history, basically. And I had never heard of the story, but apparently on the East Coast, this story is quite well known. And it's a very old story. It goes back to the 1700s. So it goes back to the late 18th century, and it takes place in a little town called Middleway, West Virginia. And this was a town that became the center of one of the strangest paranormal cases in American history. And no one to this day can really explain what exactly took place here to this family in Middleway. This picture that you see on your screen is a picture of one of the historic buildings in Middleway. They have a like a self-guided walking tour of the town where visitors can get a brochure and go from, historic building to historic building and read about what these buildings were. And many of these buildings do date back to the 1700s. And on each of these buildings, each building on the tour is numbered, and each one of the plaques on the buildings has the number of the historic building. And these two symbols, a crescent moon shape and a pair of scissors. And this is because for a period of time in the late 17th century in Middleway, a farming family in the town was plagued by manifestations of the sound of scissors clipping, clip, 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 clip in the air. And the clipping noises developed a physical, result that I will share with you in the story of the wizard clip. Well, more than 200 years ago, things were not very serene in the tiny hamlet of Middleway, West Virginia. This is a very quiet little town now, but there was an absolutely sensational, kind of chaotic situation that erupted in 1794 on the farm that belonged to a man named Adam Livingston. And he owned big acreage in the Shenandoah Valley and was a very well-known, well-liked, benevolent, generous local farmer who had a wife and family, and just, great guy, well-liked by everybody, and very prosperous, well-to-do farmer. So in 1794, this mysterious stranger, a traveler, stopped and asked for shelter at the Livingston farm. This wasn't at all unusual at the time because there were very few inns to begin with at that time in the area, and even the few that were very few and far between, I would say. Well, the Livingston family often took in, these strangers and let them stay and fed them and so on until they went on their way. But this stranger, soon after he arrived, became very ill, and he had to be put to bed and cared for around the clock by Adam Livingston's wife. So his health declined, and the stranger realized that he did not have long to live. He began to panic. He was a Roman Catholic, and he was desperate to find a priest to come and administer the last rites of the church to him before he died. Well, this is West Virginia, and West Virginia in 1794, and so just like inns, Catholics were very few and far between. There was not a priest to be found anywhere in the surrounding area, let alone in Middleway itself. Moreover, Adam Livingston had no desire to get a priest. to come to the farm to administer the last rites to the stranger. He's very stern about it, actually, and said that under no circumstances was he going to do what this stranger had asked. So the stranger dies. And to make matters worse, Livingston buries this mysterious stranger on his property in unconsecrated ground. So he's not given the last rites of the church, and he's buried in unconsecrated ground. So after the burial, all hell breaks loose. Some thought quite literally. The house became infested with all matter of strange goings on. The family started to hear the sound of galloping horses racing around the house in the middle of the night. They started to notice that large sums of money would vanish into thin air. They would watch as blazing logs of fire literally jumped out of the fireplace and danced around the room as they, ate breakfast or ate dinner. Most strangely and disturbingly, there were chickens and geese in the barnyard who would be walking around the barnyard, and their heads would suddenly just fall off and the animals would die. And then there was the clipping. From this peace and quiet that had prevailed in this town and on this farm, there arose, it was first very faint, and then it grew stronger and stronger each day, and very, very audible and very recognizable. And the family was adamant in that it was the sound of a large pair of shears or scissors clipping, like clip, 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 like when you're got a big pair of like sewing shears and you clip them back and forth. This was the sound that they were hearing, out of thin air, with nothing visible, no scissors, nothing to be seen. And it would just torment them day and night, day and night, day and night. And then one evening they were sitting around and they heard this clipping going on. And Mrs. Livingston took out her sewing to work on, and she found that the fabric that she was working on, out of it had been clipped about a dozen tiny, small crescent moons. And this began to happen with all of their things: clothing, curtains, tablecloths, even the leather of their shoes they would find these cutouts of these crescent moons on all of their fabric belongings. This also happened to visitors that came, just like in a lot of these cases that occurred in the earlier days. These stories would be, they would spread, and it would draw people from neighboring towns to come to these locations, and because they wanted to experience these things for themselves. And so many people came to the Livingston farm because they wanted to experience what had come to be known as the Wizard Clip. In fact, the town of Middleway became known as Wizard's Clip, or even just Short Clip. And the people that lived in Wizard's Clip or Middleway became known as Clippers. And this was something that was very common well through the 20th century, to refer to Middleway as Wizard's Clip or to just Clip. And the people of Middleway are still known as Clippers. So one day, a woman who was just kind of familiar and passing with the family showed up at the house and said that she had come to see the Wizard Clip. And so Mrs. Livingston, being, just very hospitable, made some tea for her and asked her to sit down. And when the woman came in the house, she had a new black satin hat on. It was like the new fashion. It was like a collapsible cap. And so she took off this new hat and she folded it up and she wrapped it in a handkerchief and she put it in the pocket of her dress. And she stayed for tea and nothing happened while she was there. But when she went to leave, she took out the handkerchief and unwrapped it and took out her new hat. And the whole hat was cut out with all of these crescent moons and the fabric had just been shredded beyond any use. So Mr. Livingston decided finally he had to do something about this, and he had become convinced, along with a lot of other people, that whatever was going here was demonic. At that time, Roman Catholics were believed to be, by most Protestants, in league with the devil. I mean, really kind of one and the same with the devil. It was believed that the Catholic Church was diabolical, that priests were working with the devil, that priests used the power of Satan to do their work, etc. And so the fact that this mysterious stranger had been Catholic was just ample proof, evidence to many people that he had basically cursed the family and called down the devil to curse the family with this clipping and the other torments that they were enduring because they had not gotten a priest to come to give him last rites before his death. So Livingston contacted his minister, his Lutheran minister, and he came to the house and prayed, but it didn't really do any good, and he didn't really know what else he could do. So then Livingston contacted a Methodist minister who came to the house, and he was going to say some prayers, but while he and several other people were standing around in the house, a giant rock came propelling out of the fireplace, landed in the middle of the room, and spun around for a full 15 minutes on the floor as everyone watched. And even though they said a lot of prayers after this, they seemed to bring no relief at all. So then Livingston sought help from a conjurer or a German faith healer who lived in a nearby town called South Mountain, West Virginia. But nothing could stop all of this that was happening. In fact, when the conjurer came, the tools that the conjurer had, like a wand and a feather that he was using, and these tools were ripped out of his hand while he was trying to, do his rituals. So one night, in the midst of all this, after all of these attempts to get rid of the clipping, Adam Livingston has a dream, and in the dream he sees a priest with a long robe on, and he recognizes this priest from a book or a newspaper article that he had read, and he knew that this was Father Dennis Cahill, who was a very famous frontier priest at the time. These priests were like circuit riders who would travel around the country and minister to different Catholics that were living in different areas of the frontier, because there were very, very few Catholic churches and priests that were assigned to a specific area. There weren't any available. So they were kind of like on-call priests that were always constantly moving around. So Livingston implored Father Cahill to come to Wizard Cliff and come and check out what was going on at the house, and he agreed to do it. So Father Cahill comes to the farm and he blesses the house and the farm. And while he was there, one of the bags of money that had previously mysteriously disappeared reappeared. And then for a short time after the priest was there, the activity seemed to have stopped. But then it started again with a vengeance. So Livingston gets in touch with Father Cahill again, and he returns accompanied by another priest, a priest named Father Gallitson. This gentleman, who was a very famous prince from Europe, who also became a frontier priest here in the United States. He was a very well-known man. Actually, there was actually a comic book about him back in the 1930s or 40s. Well known, as like a frontier, like, pioneer type folk hero. So they both return to the Livingston farm, and Father Gallatin says Mass on the Livingston property. And this finally ends the decapitation of the animals, the dancing firewood, the clipping, and the ruination of all of the fabric objects. It's over. But even stranger, possibly, after it's all over, a few days after the priests leave, the family begins to hear this voice that they describe as a consoling voice. And it's a very sweet voice that first manifests in a bright light that actually wakes Mrs. Livingston up. And the voice for months that turn into years, actually the family claims that this voice is with them for 17 years, this disembodied voice that begins to school them in the tenets of Roman Catholicism, and ends up leading to the conversion of the Livingston family to the Catholic faith. There's a whole book written about this called Adam Livingston and the Voice. I thought I had a picture of the book, but I guess I don't. Livingston was so grateful for the priests ending the manifestations on the farm, and for the this strange, what he felt was a gift of this voice that was with them for all of those years, that he gave a huge portion of his land to the Catholic Church for priests to live on. And it's still there today, and it's known as Priest's Field. And this is a statue of Adam Livingston that was erected on the Priest's Field. And right near the Priest's Field is the grave of the unknown stranger, the Catholic stranger who died on the Livingston farm in 1797. I believe it was 1794, actually. Now, today, the Priest's Field is a retreat center. It's a Catholic retreat center. Anybody can go there. I think we should get a field trip together and go out and see all these weird places in West Virginia. What do you guys think? So you can go to Priest's Field, and you can still walk that land that Adam Livingston lived on, where the Wizard Cliff, took up residence during those very strange months of 1794. And you can still visit the grave of the unknown stranger and this monument to Adam Livingston. So no one knows, quite what happened. I listened to an interesting podcast the other day about this. It was actually a Catholic podcast, and so of course the hosts were Catholic, and they believed that there was a combination of things going on in this case. They believed that there was a demonic presence for some reason that had manifested in the form of the decapitated animals and the dancing firewood and the clipping and the destruction of the fabric. And but then they also believed that there was a human spirit, probably the spirit of the mysterious stranger who had died, who had manifested in the form of this voice that appeared and taught the family, basically the Catholic faith, for years to come. In the Catholic faith, purgatory is a place where if you die and you're not good enough to go right to heaven, and you're not bad enough to go to hell, you go to purgatory, and you have to wait there for however long it takes for your soul to be purified enough to go to heaven. So you have to, and you suffer in purgatory because you're separated from God. You're very much aware of God, but you can't be near him. You have to wait. So it's apparently very tormenting. And the only thing that gets us out of purgatory is having people on earth pray for us. We can't do anything to help ourselves on purgatory once we get there. So the theory that these podcasters said was that there is something demonic that manifested on the farm, but they didn't know for what reason that would have happened at that, especially at that particular time, except that possibly it was because of the kind of brutish response of Adam Livingston to the request of the dying stranger, that maybe perhaps that ill will had attracted a demonic spirit to the farm, and that later that the human spirit of the stranger had come to help the family to change their ways and change their beliefs and become Catholic. It's a baffling story. Like I said, I've never read anything like it in the annals of parapsychology. There have been some interesting cases about physical objects being left behind by spirits. That's probably a whole nother class. Let me see what time it is. We're almost done. Let me just point out a couple of those. Physical objects left behind by ghosts. We have a couple of them in Chicago ghost lore, actually. One of them is the famous Bars of Resurrection Cemetery gate on the southwest side of Chicago that were infamously bent and burned, allegedly by the ghost of Resurrection Mary back in the 1970s. There was a truck driver that had been passing the cemetery in the wee hours of the morning, and he saw this woman locked inside of the cemetery, clutching the bars of the gate. And when he came back with the police, a few minutes later, the girl was gone, but the solid bronze bars had been pried apart and mangled, and there were handprints burned into the bars. We had another instance similar to this in 1924 when the firefighter on the near west side, Frank Levy, was washing the window of the firehouse when he rested his soapy hand on the window and said to his friend, "This is my last day on the fire service." And before his friend could ask him what he meant by that, an alarm came in, and they were all summoned to a big fire that was blazing in downtown Chicago. And Frank died in that fire later that day, shortly after he predicted his own death. And the next day, the firefighters found that where Frank had rested his soapy hand on the window the day before, he had left this black handprint embedded into the window of the firehouse, into the window of the bay window of the firehouse. Was a fascinating case that was investigated by my mentor way back when I got started in paranormal research in the 1980s. This was before the internet and everything. I started to write letters to a man named Dr. Stephen Browdy, who was a parapsychologist who taught at the University of Maryland in Baltimore. And he actually worked with Ed and Lorraine Warren on the Amityville case and some other famous cases. And he had a case down in Florida. I believe it was in the 1980s or 1990s, in which a woman was having she had patches of gold leaf appear on her skin. Big patches of it would appear on her skin, and you could peel it off. And it was examined in the laboratory at the local university, and was found to be gold. In doing extensive interviews with this woman, Dr. Browdy discovered that her husband was constantly worried about money, and he was, even though they were well off, he was just obsessed with money. And she was a housewife. She didn't have a job outside of the house. And he always made her feel like she was inadequate because she was not doing anything to contribute financially to the family. So Dr. Browdy's theory was that this woman's body was somehow producing gold leaf as sort of like an offering to her husband, who was obsessed with money. It just sounds insane, but I mean, what else? What other? I mean, I can't come up with anything better. So we do have these cases where these, there can be physical objects that are left behind by ghosts, demons, or whatever, what have you, whether they are letters, vicious letters, nice letters, cut up curtains and fabric and shoes, decapitated animals, gold leaf, black handprints. The world of paranormal is strange indeed. And this is just one aspect of what I like to call extreme hauntings.